Appreciate everyone joining here today. I'm lucky to be joined here with Citrix as well. Thank you so much for presenting. You'll hear about kind of the solutions here. And first off, kind of just want to talk through, see if this thing works here. All right. So what was Google's journey to Zero Trust here? Kind of want to talk through our lessons learned, and then Citrix will come in and kind of express how they implement this and present it here too. What I wanted to do is just kind of be an informative, educational piece of what did Zero Trust mean to us? How did we take it on the journey? What is it? And is this thing real? Because there's a lot of hype out there in the world, and every time I say the word Zero Trust, I'm immediately met with this eye roll of, oh my gosh, there's another marketer talking to me about Zero Trust, and they have no idea what the heck they're talking about. So a little bit about myself. I'm now in Google Office of the CISO. What that really means is I go out and I help customers with their security programs, both migrating to the cloud securely, as well as helping them with other security challenges across the various different industry. I am a recovering CISO. I do apologize. There will be pieces of this conversation I will shudder for as I remember them. And then previous background at Lenovo and other places, and I'm based here in Raleigh, so I'm glad to call Raleigh home. So a little bit about Google. We have a lot of infrastructure distributed across a lot of different places. If you take a look at this around our points of presence and everything else, one thing that kind of stuck out to me is reported out there in the press today, over 25% of the internet runs through Google's backbone in a various shape, form, or fashion. We have distributed points of presence all across the world, and if you think about these data centers, 23 data centers, right? They're not like a data center that I think about, right? They are football fields, hundreds of football fields wide and long. And the latest one, if you tried to travel around it, it would take you, it's about 3.1 miles walking. So these data centers are massive and complex, and with that brings large problems across it. We also own and operate the largest private network that I know of in terms of the infrastructure. So we lay our own subsea cables. A fun fact that you will never hear about probably from any of us, but we're actually putting that data to use in detecting underwater earthquakes and being able to pinpoint tsunamis based off the telemetry we get off some of those undersea cables. So the distribute around the world, globally across that, owned and operated in a private network fashion. So what does all that buy you, right? Google is very proud to say that we have a lot of applications with billions of users on them. So if you look at the top applications, 10 of those, and by the way, I believe back in just a couple years ago, there was only 1 or 2 applications that weren't over the billion user mark, some of them being Facebook and others that aren't on this list that were Google. So we own and operate billions of users, and we protect them every day through our mission and our statement around that. So as you can imagine, that makes us quite a bit of target. If you think about just kind of Google by the numbers, one of the things that I hope jumps out at this is that protecting billions of users is a very hard task from that point of view. We have mitigated and stopped the largest denial of service attacks ever recorded, both on the network layer and on the application layer. And in fact, the application layer was just a couple months ago as one site received about all of Wikipedia's traffic within the course of a minute or two. It was successfully mitigated, and at the end of it, no disruption for the client or the user, but it was largest by an order of magnitude. So kind of what's hitting us today, right? 2 numbers that I'll point out here that we'll talk about how we got here. 0 ransomware attacks on Chrome OS, and the 0 account takeovers after we implemented some of this Zero Trust technology that we're going to talk about today. So we have deployed Zero Trust across our entire footprint. Over 200,000 Googlers use this today. And I will just say, coming from financial services and other industries, it is a blessing not to have to log into a VPN with an RSA key and go through that process. So we'll talk a little bit about how we got there. What we do at Google is we kind of start off with security in mind in everything we do. And those kind of take 3 pillars today, and it's around the secure foundations that we lay across it, the Zero Trust solution, and shared fate. And shared fate is one of the things that I won't talk about too much today. We're going to dig into Zero Trust, but this concept is really important to us because I've had a lot of people talk to me about shared responsibility models. And this is where the cloud provider comes in and says, here's what we cover, here's what you cover, here's the line in the sand, right? What we're trying to do is advance that. We're trying to share fate with our customers in the security journey and make sure that we do truly protect the world and help and invest in corporations' protections of themselves and ultimately in the protection of people across the globe. So we take it by a secure by design approach on zero trust. Cloud first is our motto here. If you'll see, like Googlers, we only have Chrome browsers. We have no local apps installed on any of our laptops. It's all through the browser in a cloud native approach. We trust nothing across that. We detect everything, and then we protect everyone. So those are kind of the foundations that we build every product, every infrastructure, and every piece to. So it's not all sunshine and rainbows. Our story. We started here, right? Like most corporations, we had the castle approach to protecting our network. And as many people here will probably say in their experience of protecting large data centers and everything, it just doesn't work. In 2009, our walls failed. So in 2009, we were hit with an advanced persistent threat against our network that compromised us and about 20 other digital native companies and silicon native companies across the world. This was Project Aurora. It's highly publicized, and you guys can read about it. This was absolutely, it was attributed back to the Chinese government in terms of the persistence and access that was given across it. And what we quickly realized is that we had to change our approach. And what do? You stick a bunch of smart engineers into a room and say, how do I solve this class of issue so our walls don't fail like this again? And out of this, Zero Trust was born. And you'll see the first publication of this after 2009 in a paper with Google from a 2010 report here. And we had the same issues that everybody else had. There was nothing probably new on this slide that will surprise any security expert, right? We had a mobile workforce. We had insider threat issues. We have suppliers, just like everyone else. We have a plethora of devices distributed across multi-nations, et cetera. So just like anything, and coming from previous lifetimes, I can tell you that our inventory of vendors is in the thousands. Our list of connections are up there too, right? Dependent, trusted partners across that. So we had to rethink the way we did security from the ground up if we're going to actually combat this. So what we decided, we're going to design it from the ground up, we're going to tear it all down, and we're going to build it all back up. And essentially what we needed was a modern approach to how we looked at this. And we started at the hardware layer, building up from the root of trust all the way to the user layer about how we authenticate and how we put contextual information around everything and every access that we have. And we want to decouple access logic from any system of record from an identity perspective. So what you'll see later in a couple of these use cases is, even though I may have access to something in the corporate network, that's fantastic. But if I go to a coffee shop, I shouldn't have that same level of access, right? It should be contextual, based off my context, where I am, what I'm doing, and everything around it. Walls don't work, period. So everything is not trusted, and everything is accessible at Google and deploys this model across the Zero Trust architecture. So access is then taken and granted from what we know about you and your device, right? As well as the context around that. At the same time, all access has to be authenticated, authorized around that, and encrypted. So we have end-to-end encryption across the entire network that takes that contextual Zero Trust and validates not only the access that I'm taking at a contextual perspective, me accessing it, but every device in my chain has a root of trust and can be trusted across that ecosystem as well. And this is done through hardware validation and verification, in which we actually install 3 unique components to every motherboard to check the root of integrity all the way up the chain, all the way to the applications running on the stack in production, which are cryptographically signed and go through the SALSA verification network, and then the access of the individual user tracked across that from a various different perspective. So this was a lot of work. It took a ton of time and years in order to implement this across the entire application stack. And I actually saw some of the early reports, and much like you probably will experience in your career as you try to implement things like this, there was some pushback, right? A lot of people were like, well, this is too hard, this is too complex. But it's how do you eat that piece of pizza? One bite at a time. And over the years, we were able to implement this, and some of the success criteria was absolutely hilarious. It ranged from everything from frictionless access to let's not get fired because an executive can't get to an important email and not do some business, right? And that's exactly what they wrote down. Some of the early mission statements of the team implementing this was like, don't get fired. I can relate to that. So as we take it, enterprise identity is a point in time. It's you, your device, and a point in time across it. It's what belongs to you, and then also your device. Is it encrypted, up to date? Does it have the right verifications across that? So implementing that across various different things. But it's more than that. It's also about the attributes, right? And the policy that's defined about what you have access to and what context you have access to it. So attributes, understanding those clear device identifiers, understanding your geo, your location, context matters. And then applications and data. So this is the interesting part. As we went through this journey, the applications and workloads that we onboarded to this system each had a unique challenge, right? Each of them operated in a little bit different way, and we had to unify some of that, which is kind of the long tail that we had to keep chewing on in order to get applications up to snuff and go through that journey. So we took a very practical approach around first securing local networks, drives for storage, and then working through the workloads in each one of those use cases as we onboarded it. Eat the pizza one bite at a time. And once you see enough patterns, you can then deploy this throughout the enterprise in a different way. And one of the things I keep reminding to people is Zero Trust is not a product that you can buy. It is a process and a way of operating, and it's also organizational, it's who's doing it, and it's also technology incorporated into it, right? You have to work through this process. It may be a little bit painful at first, but once you get the momentum going, it's absolutely worth the reward at the end of it. So here's a couple examples. Joe here, I should have put my name here, but Joe is accessing the same thing from his Mac on the rules engine, right? So being able to authorize that based off where I am and what I am doing really makes a difference. And what you'll notice here is there's a rules engine that determines what am I authorized to do, a proxy that determines it, and then finally the back-end resource that is being allowed through that, through applications, workloads, etc. So being able to use this different methodology, and we'll show some of the components later, it absolutely pays off because, hey, if I'm sitting at a Starbucks, my rules engine detects that I am not sitting where I should be. And by the way, it's contextual based off of the data that we built up, right? My profile around where I should be. So, for example, I work from remote a good portion of my time now. So it knows my remote identity. And guess what? When I travel, it absolutely prompts me for access on my Titan key saying, are you really David Stone, right? And I'll have to log in and use the two-factor authentication in order to gain access to resources, etc. So that profile follows you globally and across the entire environment. We're glad NIST caught up around the line. We've been working with them, and they are fantastic, by the way, fantastic people. What you'll notice is that their pillar definitions line up very familiar to that 2009-2010 publication from Google around the identity, the device, the network, the apps and workloads, and the data, all having context around Zero Trust. And it's fantastic because they've done a really great job here in terms of documenting and standardizing across this various thing. And just as a reminder, we wanted to solve this problem for ourselves because we were really worried about nation states and advanced level threats getting access to our internal infrastructure. And we're trying to figure out how do we prevent that from ever happening again, right? So our architecture across this, and Citrix will go into this as well because they have the same core components here within their solution as well, is how do we actually do this, right? How do we establish device trust, user trust, and then how do we also do DLP and access content filtering based off of it? And you'll see just some of these things around here, but I will say once this got implemented at Google, one of the key things that we immediately saw was zero account takeovers. We've had zero since this was implemented. And our Titan keys and implemented all the way root of trust all the way through. So if you think about how much time that saves from a security team, having to go run those down every single day, it frees them up to go look for those nation state attackers, those new advanced ways of doing things. That's exactly what this enabled Google to then turn the corner on and take a look at and say, how do we then look at these and make sure that we're ahead of the next threat that's coming down and being able to get telemetry on that. So just chronologically speaking here, back in 2009, that's when we got hit, right? We published it. In 2015, this was the first time we actually got tested by a nation state, and we held up. So it showed that the zero trust model, implemented correctly, held up against nation state attackers trying to do the exact same thing. In 2009, the Chinese government was interested in dissident information, particularly around some Gmail users. And you'll see us openly and publicly talk about that. And they were fishing around and looking for that info. They didn't get it, but they were able, and they were fishing in our networks, right? So that's kind of what prompted this from the beginning. In 2015, we got real proof that we held up, right? And then 2016 is a personal favorite, got rid of those VPNs. From my personal experience, I love that. We also have published papers on this from both Beyond Prod and Beyond Corp. And this is the extension of those back into products and things that you can take a look at. In 2021, you'll see the federal government issued the executive order basically saying that all government entities need to start investing in zero trust and implementing zero trust across the network from a security point of view. And then 2022, the Google Cyber Action Team actually was formed in 2021, and we're investing $10 billion in cybersecurity across the ecosystem. Because one of the key points here is we want to give back from a cybersecurity perspective back into the community. So that $10 billion is really to help protect the rest of the world and protect users across it, because we truly believe we've got to solve it universally across the globe and implement this as well. And we're also giving out training in terms of advanced cybersecurity certifications. We did acquire a little company called Mandiant as well as part of that investment, and have really had a great time with them as well, because they very much share similar methodologies and thought processes around that. But it really enables us to then look at the next threats going through and coming into the rest of the world. Of course, we couldn't do this without a strong partner ecosystem. We at Google Cloud actually believe in openness, and we believe in partners. We think that we will want you to have the best solution possible. So with that, I'll hand it over to our partner in Citrix.
All right. Thanks, David. So Jackson Place, work at Citrix. Nice to meet you guys. So like David talked about, a lot of things with Citrix and what we do. Google does really well covering the cloud and the devices and a lot of stuff in between, but a lot of things are out of control. So we have a lot of disjointed things from COVID and stuff like that, where we have a lot of hybrid employees, we have a lot of sort of contract and vendors, and who here has used a VPN? Here. How's the experience been? Yeah, so about the same thing. So that's where the VPN is going. A lot of people hate it, to be honest. So what Citrix is trying to do is to move away from VPNs to something that's easier to handle in the background, so much so that it's something that you log into and get access to your information as quickly as possible without interrupting your workflow. So one of the biggest things Citrix has done for a long time is application virtualization, as well as network security and infrastructure with virtualization and NetScaler. So a lot of what we're doing is taking some of this stuff we've already done and expanding that out. So like David's talking about, is securing it from the cloud all the way down to your applications and devices, from secure browsers, secure identity, endpoints, secure networks, applications, and data. Anything that you can touch, making sure it's secure and verifying it along the way. So a lot of vendors really only focus on specific areas, but Citrix is really believing in making sure the holistic view, because I like to think of cybersecurity as kind of like a puzzle. If you put a lot of pieces together, there's still the cracks and you can still see those, but if you have a holistic view with as few vendors as possible, the cracks are harder to find. So comprehensive data and sort of making sure everyone's protected. So comprehensive and detailed context, sort of making sure that we understand who's using the resources, they're assigned to the right people, so we don't have someone in HR accessing financials or someone in financial accessing IT stuff. Trust me, you don't want people accessing IT stuff that are not in IT. And then just making sure that we have the controls consistent and protect all our users. Because at the end of the day, a lot of the things with the castle methodology, like David talked about, a lot of the threats we see from a security standpoint are based in-house. It's just like common things that people don't notice. Sort of, hey, left a laptop open at Starbucks, or my kid gets on there, clicks on the wrong email, and suddenly there's malware on my computer. So it's making sure that the larger threats are taken care of, but even the smaller day-to-day sort of less common or less thought of are also protected as well. So I think ZTNA, the biggest thing we've talked about is just making cybersecurity stronger, easier for your operations. I know biggest thing we see today is VPNs are cumbersome, they're hard to deal with. Making it easier for our IT individuals to do their jobs, but get back to building things that they actually truly enjoy. An easier experience. We saw everyone's hands up for the VPNs. I know David has a passion for hating VPNs. I think a lot of you share that passion. So just getting a better user experience, and then support business initiatives. You want to go BYO? You want to go remote workers? You can do that safely and securely. So secure private access, that is what we're talking about today. So what it does is Citrix ZTNA, Zero Trust Network Access. So what it does is, depending on the type of user you are, employee, contractor, it's for your internal, external, SaaS apps, anything you could do based on identity that you set up internally. So really making sure that the right users are accessing the right information. So how do we do this? We do this through some of the stuff David talked about, actually. Adaptive auth. So I work remote too. If I log in at my office in Raleigh, or at my house in Raleigh, it's okay, that's normal. But if I access it from somewhere abnormal, sort of like a Florida, if I'm traveling or somewhere like that, they're going to say, hey, this is not normal for Jackson. We're going to put some controls on there. And so that's where the controls are. Maybe it's a different time. I'm accessing my information at 3 a.m. in the morning. That's kind of weird. Or I'm accessing it from an unused device or a non-corporate device. We don't want them accessing the different information at things that are out of the normal. So put on controls. We have the single sign-on. I forget passwords all the time. They suck. It's time to move on. Have one login, single sign-on to where you need to go, and speed up your applications. Enterprise browser or secure browser. So I think the biggest thing we see today in the enterprise that we roll across is a lot of people think the most used application in your enterprise is your web, but it's actually your internet browser. Shout out to Google Chrome. I think it's, how many years now has Google Chrome been #1 browser?
Oh, it's been a few, yeah. Most secure too, but
yeah,
we'll just
yeah, for sure.
throw it out there.
So it's making sure that, hey, if you're a financial company and you're accessing an internal web application, we're not going to put you, or like a Salesforce or something like that, we're going to put you in a Chromium-based browser that is isolated. So once the session clears, all that data is gone. Making sure that you can't access or pull anything out, and then we're going to put controls on that. So you want to copy and paste. Okay, cool. We have your IP address on there, so we know it's you. And other controls where if you want to try and copy and paste, we could limit that as well. So a lot of really cool security controls. And then SaaS and web apps, or SaaS apps, the biggest thing. So the biggest misconception I have from my friends now in cybersecurity is, oh, my SaaS apps are secure. Okay. What makes you think that? It's just they're SaaS apps. It's like, that's not true. It's user traffic, stuff like that, and then you have to make sure you have the right controls in front of them. the biggest thing we have with these SaaS apps is, yes, they have controls on their end, but that internally does not always apply to you, especially with like Salesforce and stuff like that. Like, a lot of the big financials are not going to trust Salesforce to host their data or have that data. They want to make sure that they control the access and make sure they control the cybersecurity around those instances. So the holistic picture of this is making sure all of this is in place to control all these areas and make it as simple as easy to use for your end users. So talked about the enterprise browser. So all these controls that you see here, just making it a lot easier for your end users, as well as making it so that if they just pop in, they won't even know it's a Chromium browser unless they really are looking for it. So the whole point of this is to make the end user not feel the security controls like the old days where it's productivity versus security. We're really trying to, and a lot of companies are really trying to move forward with the approach, hey, we want to be productive and secure. So, like we talked about, replaces that nasty VPN agent. No more network devices to manage, no public IDs, no more giant tunnels into your environment anymore. So that's the biggest thing I could say. No more giant tunnels into your environment. We have a global network of POPs, thanks to our great partners at Google and other cloud providers we work with. We have a great point of presence, make sure that everything is up and integrated. So that's the big thing with the secure agent. And of course, you have a virtual desktop stack as well and integrates with that. So if you are a Citrix user, it's very similar to what you already have today. But the other thing is, like I said, we go out to those SaaS and web apps and taking what we already do on the virtualization, just extending it out. Then making sure we have a productive user experience and a unified admin experience. So it's very simple and easy to deliver applications and unified user experience for our end users as well. Now,
Awesome. Well, thank you. I did want to leave just a minute or two for questions if we have it. One thing I'll point out here is we're really on a mission to help protect the world. I know it may sound a little cheesy, but we think we can do it. And we want to make the try. Across this, the Google Cyber Action team and partners are really enabling others, our customers, to be more secure. That's our mission, and you'll see different groups within Google doing different things around secure supply chain development, open source security, threat analysis, providing that research out, zero trust partners across the entire ecosystem of threats that our customers face day in and day out. So just wanted to give a big shout out to the huge team as well, and inside of Google and outside of Google that's helping us on that journey as well from that perspective. I have attached a couple references in the back of the deck if you're interested on white papers, blogs, and series. I'd be remiss if I said don't go look at YouTube and go Google Hacking Google. There is a really good series about how we were compromised, the internal teams that help protect us day in and day out, how our red teams operate, our threat analysis group that are tracking nation states and other threats against the world. So go Google Hacking Google, and you will find a very good series around the security within Google as well. And with that, I want to say thank you and open the floor up for any questions.
Let's give them a round of applause.
Yes, sir.
Great for your company. I work for a company that's over 50 years old. We've acquired zillions of companies over time. I deal with applications that are 20, 30, 40 years old still. How do you apply a zero trust architecture in that environment?
so I could take that. So a lot of these applications we deal with every day as Citrix. That is a huge use case for virtualization with these legacy applications. So the biggest thing is we see these applications I've worked with manufacturing that have stuff they built on like Vista. It sounds like you have stuff from beyond Windows days. CPM. So what you can do is, what we like to do is containerize those, virtualize them, and then update the systems around it. So you can have those legacy applications, but modernize them, put security controls around them, and make it a more secure environment.
Yeah, and to kind of answer that too is one bite at a time, right?
Yeah.
Look at the workloads with the quick wins on those and build out the workload patterns as well.
Yeah.
I feel your pain coming from a prior financial experience. There might have been a few applications that I deal with customers and everyone at the same time that have the same problems across various different industries, right? Legacy applications across that. And being able to first control the endpoint and the access around that in order to put the controls around that, and then slowly working into those access patterns, knowing that some systems may never go away. It's called a mainframe, right?
Yeah.
427.
That's it. So being able to put that contextual access around it gives you a better perimeter. Now, is it going to be fully? Probably not.
Yeah.
But there are good security even within the mainframe that you can leverage, right, for good security around that as well.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
So you mentioned in your timeline, like, Google got rid of VPNs, right? And when COVID hit, a lot of companies had to go to a remote access strategy to continue to operate. Did either of you see that as COVID as a stimulator for zero trust instead of going to VPN for companies? And can you talk about maybe a couple brief use cases for where that kind of pushed some companies over the precipice to just go zero trust rather than go VPN?
So what I saw with companies during COVID is we got to remember those first 2 months was just panic buying being on the sales side. It was just like, we need something to survive. Like, we have our people, like, I'm sure all of us remember, it was one day we're at work, then the next day we're getting emails, like, everyone goes home. So a lot of companies were just, we need something to go. But then once we saw, after this first 2 months, kind of like into the year, people were like, okay, we're kind of through the panic stage. We kind of understand what's going on. Their security teams are talking. It's like, we just bought a lot of VPN, and that puts a huge hole. So what it does is they had to panic buy, but it also kind of showed the underlying things because it was so rapid and so quick that they're like, these underlying issues kind of like skyrocketed, where it's like, okay, we have a few remote users with issues, not two issues, but if the whole company's like, this VPN sucks, then okay, that's something we have to fix. So I think what it did is, and David could have talked to this as well, I think it first kind of slowed it and then just lit a match on gasoline, where it just quickly realized a lot of companies are like, we get off VPN. And I think Gartner had a study or a statistic where they surveyed a lot of companies, and a lot of companies, I think it's 60% of companies plan to be off VPN by 2023, and let's get a clap to that, because the more we're off those things, the better.
It's a personal mission right there.
Oh,
All
yeah, for
companies off
sure.
VPN. No, I definitely agree with that. It was first the panic of like, how do we just maintain operations, right?
No.
But now what we're seeing is not only because of COVID and the remote work and the hybrid work strategy, but then also the government issuing their zero trust mandate. It's now part of everyone's strategy. And if you think about the underlying issue they're trying to solve is, how do we keep bad people out of our networks? Well, VPNs put a nice encryption wrapper over that network traffic, right? But attackers have figured out long ago how to get to people and how to get to their access through phishing and other campaigns, right? So really around that is trusting nothing and enabling that to then be verified and validated through all of the extra telemetry you get out of that and policy-based engines. So as long as hackers are continuing to exploit people, I will continue to probably see zero trust on the rise, and at least the methodology, the mindset, and then how do we actually implement that throughout there. So yes, it's got a huge uptick. I don't know of one company I work with that's not large that doesn't have some plans to go into zero trust, or they're thinking through the execution of that strategy now about how do we bring it on board. But it is a one bite at a time. You don't get there overnight. It is a process, right? So as they're working through that process, they'll continue to probably adopt these methodologies and get more and more of their workloads onto it.
I think it was also the next thing with that too is I think people can remember a lot of stories during COVID where there were just so many ransom attacks like going back and forth. I think it's because it was a crazy time and a lot of areas got hit. I mean, with Citrix, we work really a lot in healthcare. Healthcare had to really adapt to this because a lot of these bad guys saw, oh, hospitals are getting overrun right now. They are great targets. So a lot of hospitals were getting targeted for ransomware attacks and during the height of COVID. So a lot of companies had to very quickly adapt their strategy because one, they didn't want to have to pay ransomware, but they also didn't want to be that company on the news that got hit. So it's sort of, a lot of people have gotten wiser. And I think that also helped is a lot of hybrid work. It's not as disjointed. A lot of the panic has settled down and kind of leaved as COVID has kind of gotten more under control. But I think the good news is I think people have become a lot more knowledgeable and wiser around cybersecurity. I mean, I have my mom who never thought about it talking to me now. It's like, how do I make myself more secure? So it's, I mean, people who never used to think about it are now thinking about it a lot more just because of everything they've seen during COVID.
I have 2 questions.
Oh, twofer. Awesome.
One,
I love it.
if I search how to hack Google or Google hacks, am I going to get put on the list?
Absolutely.
Yes.
But you're already on the list, so don't worry about it.
Yeah. Hey, as long as long as someone
No.
doesn't show up to your like house and ask you to come with them, you're good.
No, absolutely not.
Yeah.
So I like this awesome young man back here, worked for one of those great companies who, one, wasn't on your list, and two, we use our own technology. We use VPNs, and now I personally use Titan Keys. I think it's amazing. Zero Trust. I'm a BlackBerry guy, so like,
Awesome. Yes.
BlackBerry today.
If they ever do my BlackBerry,
Yeah.
exactly.
How would something? How can an organization that's older, that's established, that doesn't have to listen to anyone, that doesn't appear to get hacked often, how do we implement a zero trust? Like, how does that work within this environment? Like, how? Because like I like security. Like, I don't care about inconvenience. I don't care about inconveniencing my colleagues. I would rather be secure.
Yeah.
You know. So how does that work within the realms of our old, outdated mindsets to become secure completely, so we can move on to the next problem?
That's a fantastic question. And if I had the answer to that, I probably would not be standing up here on the stage.
So,
I'll give you the long answer.
Yeah.
It's culturally, right? It's an organizational change across the board. And we do notice this a lot, right? When we work with organizations, we actually have a term, the wise old owl says oot and not to. And what it means is organizations, operations, and then tech, right? And it's a cultural mind shift of how do we implement these things and how do we make it valuable to the enterprise across it. The challenge there, of course, is that with some, it's like, okay, well, I've got a previous history. I don't think I'm ever going to be hacked, or I don't have a history of it. So the imperative sometimes isn't there until it is.
Correct.
Right? And that's an unfortunate situation where suddenly the gas is poured onto the fire and the budgets for cybersecurity open up, right? And the walls come down magically. Magic. In absence of that, though, there are ways to kind of, from a zero trust mindset, put in the business imperative around how users can operate more frictionless around that, and you can actually show business ROI on some of that as well, and how that can then impact the overall. Now, I'd be lying if I say that's easy. It's not. Anything organizational and culturally is absolutely difficult, but like with anything, it starts with a POC, a pilot, putting that into motion, showing the value to the business, proving out the business use case, and then building off of that success with those people and the stakeholders that are willing to support you across that. I'm sorry, go ahead.
no, for sure. I think also the mindset of is like a lot of these things, the good old days, I think, David, it's like there's a lot of mindset that changes that needs to be made, but it's also like these guys are smart. Like if organizations don't keep up, they will like be exposed, and that's the whole mindset. I remember talking to my buddy who worked with a utility that was like, oh, we're using the same VPN from 1990. And exactly. And it's like, oh, we've never been hacked. And his engineer on the call is like, no, that's completely false. Like, there's no way. Because you have to keep up with the times because these guys adapt really quick. And
How do you think they'd never been hacked then? Was it
'Cause-
just like a myth that some employees believed?
or they just never saw it.
Right.
They never
So
noticed.
they're just telling everybody, oh, we've never been hacked.
No?
They haven't detected it. Maybe.
Yeah, they haven't detected
We have
it.
some great incident response
Yeah.
contacts that we can put at the end of this call.
So,
And that's actually a common scenario even in like M&As and other
Yeah.
places where you're stepping in and a company may not have the visibility around it and looking through those visibility points. Most of the time they just haven't realized it
No.
yet.
Somebody just released an article on the statistics of how many M&As lose value because of the cyber investigations associated.
Absolutely, and it's very true, and that is a big part of the M&A playbook from a lot of the corporations, looking at that cybersecurity, looking at the insurance around that as well is a huge area as well.
that's why there's still a data room business where
Yeah, I think it
they
was
still
widely-
come in person and
Well,
do documents.
one thing when watching your presentation I was kind of struck with is that a lot of it's great but a lot of it seems to be based off of Chromium. Do you ever worry about the monoculture? Because I mean, right now, it's most browsers, even like I believe Edge now is Chromium based, and so the only other real competition is Firefox, and yeah, Safari. I thought Safari went Chromium, didn't it?
I don't think so.
No, not yet. Okay. So it seems like Chromium is supporting a lot, and you have Google's a great company, great teams. It's open source, but still, you're putting a lot on that one piece. Is that ever?
Yeah, and it's one of the reasons why I invest so heavily in open source security as well, right? It's open and transparent across that, and it's one of also the areas that part of that $10 billion investment that you don't see under the covers is us actually going out to open source companies and helping them with their security, because we don't mind helping protect the rest of the internet too, across that. So absolutely, we think about like operational resilience across that, and then dependencies across that, and then how do we mitigate against that. I'll take it as a compliment that so many people have picked up Chromium, by the way, and really looked at the security and said, okay, that's fantastic, right, as a base and that foundation. But I do think that as part of that, the inherence of having that open and secure continuous development really does help in the long run, right? If you've got continuous improvement in security, and I always kind of equate this to the OODA loop, right? You've got to move quicker than your attackers are moving, and you've got to consistently do that. And the only way to help with that is opening it up to the community as well, and getting their assistance and buy-in, and knowing what you get underneath the covers, right?
Yeah.
For sure. But yeah, absolutely. Go ahead.
So, I'm interested in your perspective, like, for me, my perspective as a former, VPN and identity service manager is that most people's VPNs suck because their identity strategy sucks. Would you say that that's consistent with your view, 180,000 foot view of the world? And if so, what are some baby steps that enterprises can, or even small businesses can start making in the identity space to make their remote access strategy or zero trust strategy come to fruition easier?
Yeah, that's a fantastic point. Identity is a hard nut to crack, and in most places, the basics on identity are worth the investment, right? Where the identity strategy itself isn't really implemented well. Even things like single sign-on, right? Not being implemented consistently across the organization, and multiple authentication lists, an authorization list, sticking in every application that you can think of based off legacy, all of those fun things, right? The first is, how do you control that? How do you centralize identity? and how do you look at that from a context and a role-based awareness. And absolutely, that is a huge baby step, but a huge step nonetheless of doing single sign-on and controlling identity in a single source. You will always have a long tail with that though. As you go through, that's just practical kind of, there will always be a long tail. There'll be some application that doesn't adhere to it. So you've got to kind of prioritize and keep picking it off and keep eating it one bite at a time, because that identity strategy is so important in this scenario. You can put wrappers and context around it and help out with that, and that helps with the layered defense model. However, at the end of the day, the identity strategy, single sign-on, all of that stuff, I call it good cyber hygiene or good hygiene. You got to pay attention to it, absolutely.
One other question, just out of curiosity, I actually got a couple tagging keys at all things open, but previously I got my UV keys, which I use. But one thing that's frustrating about them is I go onto like my bank's website, or I go to a lot of websites that I would really love to secure with 2FA, and you know, you just don't see that. Is any of your investments helping, you know, other companies spreading 2FA, getting the physical key encryption available more places?
It's
Yeah.
actually a great Citrix.
Yeah. So, yeah, we're having that conversation with a lot of customers. A lot of customers are moving to 2FA. A lot of the financials are trying to figure that out. They totally make sure that they obviously want to make sure that if you're accessing your money, you are who you say you are. And so, like David's been saying, it's a step process. Like any of these large financials, Truist, B of A, like First Citizens, they massive environments. So they have to incorporate everything. So they're very glacial in sometimes their changes, but they when it comes to cybersecurity, they know what they need to do and are actively taking steps to identify ways to do it. I mean, we talk to my financial customers a lot, and every time we talk is, how does this impact our security comes up. No matter what it is like, we got to talk to security because we got to understand from a security perspective how this integrates to the environment.
And yes, we're working with them and trying to help as well in every conversation that we have. And as with any good large corporation, it takes time and effort. And like as mentioned, there's processes you do have to follow in order to get it implemented across the board. But yeah, there's a reason why we open sourced the Titan keys and started handing them out for free on Gmail and other things, right? We're continuously investing and say, how do we up the game here?
Yeah,
Whether it's with Fido or other
on
things.
them.
Yeah, absolutely. And how are we doing on time? I don't want to keep anybody too late here.
Oh, because of the last show of the evening.
I'm sorry, did I miss a question? Yes,
I
ma'am.
had one.
Sorry.
So you're pushing the envelope on the protection side,
Mhm.
again, flipping the script on the extended detection and response world that is using all these elements to find behavioral anomalies. So how is the detection and response technology solution space evolving to now adapt to this new model? And what do you recommend?
I mean, there's a lot of analytics companies, and Citrix has their own, but it's quickly identifying with threats. Like, okay, this is not normal. So someone's downloading a ton of information that's out of the normal. Okay, let's put on a screen recording. This person is now going to places they don't usually go. Okay, we're gonna send a notification to them. It's like, hey, are you this who you are? And then eventually, over time, if this continues, they'll just cut the session and like erase all the data that was transferred.
So
I
the
mean-
detection is built in the Citrix.
Yes, as well as a lot of other companies now are putting analytics in to identify areas of security where it's just like, okay, if there's any abnormalities, like certain triggers are going to start happening. And so as soon as these triggers, as more and more the risk starts passing up, the more it starts happening until immediately the session's just cut.
And
Yeah.
how does the monitoring happen of the policies, the rule sets, that engine where all that magic stuff happens? How do you make sure that that stays?
Machine learning. So a lot of people very much work in sort of a routine. a lot of people have a very normal routine. So a lot of these products and technologies will identify, hey, I'm a finance person. I'm going to access these 3 apps every day. Or I'm in accounting. I access my TurboTax a lot. Or I'm in sort of legal. So I'm doing a lot of legal stuff. So it's very much routine based. So when something starts going left, it's like can identify this person's been doing this same routine very often. This is not normal. Let's monitor it. And then it can quickly escalate based on, okay, this is very not normal, and just start hitting those triggers.
Yeah, and I'll add on to that just a little bit. So we also have a detection engine out there around some of that areas. Chronicles the product, but essentially it evolved from how Google did security operations on the inside in terms of large-scale data analysis. It absolutely takes into account the user behavior and context around that, and there's actually policy engines in there that you can set automatic behaviors based off accesses of what you will allow and what you won't. So if you're willing to lose 5 records, that's one thing, right? If you're willing to lose 10,000, it allows you to kind of contextualize that and look at that from that perspective as well. But taking a look at that from also the machine learning aspect and then looking at the access control around that. We've also released some preventative controls, just Google specific, so I apologize, but there's something called VPC service controls that we also can implement, and you can actually set data perimeters and access perimeters, even if your network and other things are either allowing or disallowing it as a line of defense around that. So we're looking not only at the preventative side of like how do you use the access information to prevent data from going outside of this perimeter, but then on the response side, how do you look at that, normalize it, and then take immediate actions around that. And always the question that we ask ourselves is, can you automate this? Because ideally you want to have the SOC analysts automating 60% of their workload and investigating 40% manually and continuously improving those automation engines so they can continuously write better rules and better detections out of that for sure. Absolutely. That's a great question.
I have a fun one.
Absolutely.
So, when you're looking at this and identification and automation responding to anomalies, obviously most of us think that at a policy level for groups or something higher. When you bring data science and modeling to an individual user level, how far can you go down that trail before that's biometrics and it's a violation of employee or individual rights, or now you have taken on this just massive amount of sensitive data? Because I know in government systems, you can't log keystrokes and keystroke patterns because that is part of my identity. So do you guys approach that in any way when you're developing new strategies and technologies enabling that?
So the big thing we do is like keystrokes and stuff like that. It's kind of that's kind of invasion. Like we do anti-key loggers and stuff like that for that specific reason. It's specific, like downloading a lot of data, like venturing outside of where they're sort of located. Sort of, okay, we have a certain idea of what they do based on applications they access, places they go within their device or within this sort of Citrix or Google ecosystem. And we have an idea of where that is. And then suddenly, if they kind of venture off that path, okay, let's put a spotlight on them. But they're not going to do like, you have to hit a certain like thing that's kind of sets that spotlight on, but most of the time they're not like doing like watching your camera or stuff like that. That's,
I mean, that makes
yeah.
sense, but in order to identify an anomaly, you have to have a picture of who I am and my natural typical behavior. So therefore, you have data somewhere that is supporting evidence showing you a virtual profile of me and what I do.
Yeah, so we analyze metadata. So that's where you go, applications. Citrix is very anti, like, we don't want to hold anyone's data. We'll control the metadata and do that, but specifically like controls, like that is set internally, but it's all based on specific triggers around company things. They're not going to go off certain things unless it's like going to a sketchy site or something like that. But
Google?
yeah,
So we go through privacy design and reviews, just like we go through security design and reviews.
Yeah.
So there's actually teams dedicated to privacy design, de-anonymization of data. The same is true, like no Googler has access to that information. Like you have to go through a very rigid process in which the customer has to approve access to even get into a customer environment from a Google Cloud perspective. So, and that's only for troubleshooting and help desk, and they've got to request it, and there's this long, nice process that's wrapped around that. However, you know, the privacy design is very important from that perspective. De-anonymization of data, and even to your point about that, the models, we were actually looking at how do you train AI in models, and we actually are looking at the privacy by design on that, not using any customer info or anything else, but we're looking at how do you build models and things so you can't actually extract out what the model was trained on. So looking at it even further of like you can't manipulate it to figure out personal information based off model output.
The aggregation
yeah.
and the bias
Absolutely.
that's inherent.
Yep,
There's a
so,
really good book called 101 Things You Need to Know About Ethics and Data Science.
yeah,
yes.
and
That one's fun.
Yes,
And as-
absolutely. But yeah, it's a big area of focus for us. We don't want to have any access to data. It's the reason why it's encrypted all the way from us.
No.
It's a good thing.
and
Yeah, by the way, I really appreciate you guys allowing me to request things be removed from your search results. Thanks for that.
yeah, but as global companies, Europe is really key on privacy and stuff like that. So with compliance, it's a lot of technology is standard across different areas. So we're not going to do full data harvesting here in the United States and then not do it in Europe. It's just make it standard, unless the company is very unethical.
Yeah.
So that's the big thing with a lot of these tech companies is if you want to do business in Europe, you got to stay with their privacy laws, and that really only pertains to companies having access to like metadata for tracking. And the others is like, that's the main thing we can track is just metadata for analytics, machine learning, stuff like that.
Yeah, and if you haven't heard of it, one thing I'll point out on the European, DORA is coming out in the European stage. Take a look at that one as well, because that's a very interesting kind of next advancement of the EU privacy laws around that, which they do actually contain metadata standards and those types of things. So we've been actively working with them in the community about how to implement that in a privacy aware way and a secure way as well. So absolutely recommend it. And the IAPP,
Yeah.
I know nothing about privacy or any of that.
I mean,
so
I just
full
know
disclosure. I'm learning
GDPR.
every day.
I just know GDPR doesn't allow European
Yep.
citizens or Canadian citizens to have their stuff in American soil. Meta almost lost full access to Europe because of that.
You know, it's not just their citizens.
What?
It's anybody that's
Live.
geographically
Yeah.
there.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's crazy how hard to figure out technologically. Like,
No.
if this data was collected might mean it falls under different laws.
No, it was very. I was in Europe for a vacation. It was very interesting actually going to Google, and it's just like, do you want your data collected, and like very much, or do you want your information or anything like that? I mean, Google already does that here in the States, but it's one of those where every app had to ask, do you want your data collected?